Chapter 1 The Arrival. The old house stood at the edge of town, shrouded in shadows and whispers. Its decaying façade was a monument to forgotten secrets, the windows dark and hollow like the eyes of a long-dead corpse. Locals called it the Blackwood Manor, a place where light feared to tread and time had surrendered to the creeping tendrils of decay. It was on a cold, moonless night that Sarah McBride found herself standing at its iron gates. She had moved to the small town of Ravenwood seeking solace after the tragic death of her husband. The townsfolk had been kind but distant, their eyes often drifting nervously towards the manor when she mentioned she was looking for a place to stay. It was the only affordable option, the real estate agent had assured her, with a look that spoke volumes more than his words. Sarah pushed open the creaking gate, its hinges screaming in protest, and made her way up the overgrown path. The house loomed larger with every step, its oppressive presence pressing down on her chest. She reached the front door, an ornately carved barrier of dark wood, and turned the heavy brass handle. The door swung open with a sigh, revealing a grand foyer lined with dusty portraits and faded wallpaper. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and neglect. As Sarah stepped inside, she felt a chill run down her spine, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. She shook off the feeling, blaming it on the drafty old house, and set about exploring her new home. The first floor was a labyrinth of rooms and hallways, each one more dilapidated than the last. She found a large, dusty parlor with a grand piano covered in cobwebs, a library filled with ancient, crumbling books, and a dining room where the remnants of a long-forgotten feast still lay on the table, covered in a thick layer of dust. As she ascended the creaking staircase to the second floor, a sense of unease settled over her. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. She found the master bedroom at the end of the hall, its massive four-poster bed draped in tattered, moth-eaten curtains. The room felt like a tomb, untouched by time or light. Sarah unpacked her bags, trying to make the space feel a little more like home. As she placed a framed photo of her husband on the nightstand, she heard a faint whisper behind her. She turned, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Only the empty room and the encroaching darkness. She laughed nervously, chiding herself for being so jumpy. It was just an old house, after all. Nothing to be afraid of. But as she settled into bed that night, the whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of shadowy figures and distant, mournful cries. Chapter 2 The Haunting. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah tried to settle into her new life. She busied herself with repairs, scrubbing away years of grime and trying to breathe life back into the old manor. But the house resisted her efforts. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move when she wasn't looking, and always, there were the whispers. At first, they were faint and indistinct, like the murmur of distant voices carried on the wind. But soon they became clearer, more insistent. They called her name, beckoned her to the darkest corners of the house. She tried to ignore them, telling herself it was just her imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more demanding. One evening, as she was reading in the library, the temperature suddenly dropped. Her breath fogged in the air, and she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, heart racing, and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her eyes hollow and empty. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The woman said nothing, only stared with those vacant eyes. Then she turned and glided silently down the hallway. Sarah hesitated, fear rooting her to the spot, but curiosity got the better of her. She followed the apparition, down the winding corridors and into a small, hidden room at the back of the house. The room was a study, filled with old, leather-bound books and a large oak desk. The ghostly woman stood by the window, staring out into the night. As Sarah stepped into the room, the figure slowly turned to face her. "You must leave this place," the woman said, her voice a hollow echo. "It is not safe." "Who are you?" Sarah asked again, her fear giving way to a desperate need for answers. "I am Emily Blackwood," the apparition replied. "This was my home once, but it has become a prison. There is a darkness here, a malevolent force that feeds on the living. You must leave before it's too late." Sarah felt a cold hand on her shoulder and spun around to find the room empty. When she turned back, the ghost was gone. She stood there, trembling, the weight of the warning pressing down on her. She knew she should leave, but something held her back, a compulsion to uncover the truth behind the haunting. Chapter 3: The Revelation. Sarah spent the next few days delving into the history of Blackwood Manor. She visited the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records. What she found was a tale of tragedy and horror. The Blackwood family had been prominent members of the community, known for their wealth and influence. But their legacy was marred by a series of mysterious deaths and disappearances. Emily Blackwood, the last of the family line, had vanished without a trace over a century ago. Rumors abounded of dark rituals and occult practices, whispers of a curse that had claimed the lives of all who dared to inhabit the manor. Sarah felt a growing sense of dread as she uncovered each new piece of the puzzle. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, Sarah sat in the study, surrounded by her findings. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the whispers seemed louder than ever. She tried to focus on her research, but a sense of impending doom gnawed at her. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the temperature plummeted. Sarah looked up to see Emily's ghost standing before her, her expression one of sorrow and fear. "You are in great danger," Emily said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The darkness is awakening. It knows you are here, and it will stop at nothing to claim you." "What can I do?" Sarah asked, desperation in her voice. "There is a way to end this," Emily replied. "A ritual, a cleansing that can banish the darkness forever. But it is dangerous, and the price may be more than you are willing to pay." Sarah nodded, determination in her eyes. "Tell me what I need to do." Chapter 4: The Ritual. Emily guided Sarah through the steps of the ritual, explaining that it required a combination of ancient symbols, rare herbs, and a blood sacrifice. The instructions were clear but daunting, and Sarah felt a chill of fear at the thought of what she would have to do. The next day, she gathered the necessary materials, scouring the town for the herbs and drawing the symbols meticulously on the floor of the study. As the sun set, she steeled herself for what was to come. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices urging her to leave, to give up. But she couldn't. She had to see this through. As midnight approached, Sarah stood in the center of the circle, the symbols glowing faintly in the candlelight. She took a deep breath and began the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. The air grew thick with a malevolent presence, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting like living things. The temperature dropped further, and Sarah could see her breath fogging in the air. She continued the incantation, her voice rising above the whispers. Suddenly, the candles blew out, plunging the room into darkness. A cold, dark wind swirled around her, and she felt a powerful force trying to push her out of the circle. She held her ground, repeating the incantation with all her strength. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and indistinct. It was a man, tall and imposing, with eyes that burned with an unholy light. He stepped into the circle, and Sarah felt a wave of dread wash over her. "You dare to challenge me?" the figure hissed, its voice a chilling echo. "I will not let you take this house," Sarah replied, her voice firm despite the terror that gripped her. The figure laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You are but a mortal. You cannot hope to defeat me." But Sarah continued the incantation, pouring all her will into the words. The figure screamed in rage, its form flickering and distorting. The symbols on the floor began to glow brighter, and a brilliant light filled the room. With a final, agonizing cry, the figure dissolved into the light, and the oppressive presence lifted. The room was silent once more, the darkness banished. Sarah fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Chapter 5, The Aftermath. In the days that followed, the house seemed to come alive. The oppressive gloom lifted, and sunlight streamed through the windows for the first time in years. The whispers were gone, and the air was filled with a sense of peace. Sarah continued her work on the manor, determined to restore it to its former glory. She felt a connection to the house now, a sense of purpose in preserving its history and honoring the memory of Emily Blackwood. One evening, as she was cleaning the study, she found a hidden compartment in the old oak desk. Inside was a diary, its pages yellowed with age. It was Emily's diary, detailing the horrors she had faced and her desperate attempts to protect the town from the darkness that had claimed her family. Sarah read the diary with a heavy heart, grateful for the sacrifice Emily had made. She vowed to ensure that the darkness would never return, that Blackwood Manor would be a place of light and hope. As she stood in the study, looking out over the now vibrant gardens, she felt a presence beside her. She turned to see Emily's ghost, her expression serene and grateful. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice a soft whisper. "You have freed us." Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. "Rest in peace, Emily. Your home is safe now." With a final, lingering glance, Emily's ghost faded into the light, and Sarah knew that Blackwood Manor was truly at peace. The old house stood as a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a place where darkness had been vanquished and hope had been restored. And in the quiet moments, when the sun set and the shadows lengthened, Sarah could feel the presence of those who had come before, watching over her and the house they had all fought to save.